The worst mistakes I've made in my career have been not taking a chance, where I look back and I go, wow, I stayed there too long, or I didn't take that opportunity when it came to me. It's never been taking the leap that I've regretted. So would really encourage these young graduates to look for the opportunity to take the leap into the unknown, because everything's changing, and that's where the opportunities are going to be.
Welcome to the Engati CX show. It's a great privilege and an honor to welcome our guest today. Let me introduce her, Dunkin. She is the Chief Technology Officer, State and Local Government at Dell Technologies. She's also a former CIO of the US EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and Santa Clara County. She's highly experienced and a versatile leader, specialized in delivering exceptional business results, creating high performance and accountable cultures, and taking organizations to the next level of productivity and effectiveness. She develops and leads world-class cross-functional and global organizations across diverse industries. And a pleasure having you on board.
Thanks. It's great to be with you today.
Great. So I guess let me start with just kind of your impressions. Obviously, top of mind, the whole world is kind of inundated with the talk about COVID and the impact across the globe. And I would be curious in terms of as you've experienced it, both how would you say have government organizations as well as kind of corporate world evolved in terms of trying to handle this pandemic?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think we all thought that we were going to have this under control in a couple 3 months, and it sort of looked that way for a while. So I think we started, a lot of people, most state and local governments started with very short-term solutions, right? How can we get our employees working at home productively, quickly? Very much a lot of, literally some organizations picking up desktops and taking them home, or taking a laptop home and sticking it on a cardboard box to sort of get it at the right height. And as we've seen this continue, there's a couple things that are happening. One is obviously we're trying to make the work experience for employees more productive and more secure, right? So really looking at what employees need to be productive at home, and what do we need as organizations to make those employees, the environment secure, because obviously there are a whole bunch of different concerns from a security standpoint when employees are at home than they're in the office. And so state and local government and the private sector, I think, are all wrestling with that. On the state and local government level, the other thing that we realized after a couple months is people need government services that historically we've only delivered in person. And what's happened is that organizations have had to very quickly figure out how to deliver those government services remotely. And, the fascinating thing is, I think many of us have always believed government could move faster under the right circumstances. And the fascinating thing is that we have seen government move very, very fast. We've demonstrated that government can deliver quickly when we remove a lot of the constraints that are placed upon them. And for example, one of my favorite stories is the County of Alameda stood up online marriage licenses and weddings over a weekend. The county determined that they were going to do this, and they used teleconferencing and online payments and an automated document signature flow process, and immediately they had that solution. Under normal circumstances, that would have, if it had ever happened, it would have been months and months of review and discussion and decision making, and then vendor selection, and it would have taken a couple of years to do it. And there are stories like that all over state and local government where people have just fixed things really, really quickly. We've certainly seen some real weaknesses in solutions that exist that are harder to fix, like the unemployment systems across the country, which are bigger problems. But we've really seen government step up and deliver really quickly in ways that we've sort of treated them as unable to do.
True. Yeah, very, very true. I know you've done a lot of work, on strategy, right? And I was kind of curious because, every company went into 2020 with a well laid out strategic plan. And then 3 months in, that strategy is obviously out of the window. So I would be curious your thoughts on how do companies, kind of come out of this? Should they actually kind of try and redefine their strategy, or do they say let's just get out of 2020 and then we'll think more long term? What would your advice be?
Yeah, it's really tempting to just be reactive right now, I think. And I talk to a lot of people who, a lot of CIOs who right now say, I don't have any time to talk about anything strategic. I just have to figure out how to get through today. And you can understand the temptation that, especially as we went through everybody's got to go home, got to figure out how to deliver services remotely, then everybody's got to go back. Oh, wait, they're not going back. Maybe they are going back. So a lot of confusion and a lot of priorities changing rapidly. But the folks who really sit down now and think about strategy are the ones who are going to come out of this most successfully. If you're not thinking about what's my long-term strategy, someone else is going to eat your lunch. And if you're in the public sector, you don't have this idea of competition the same way you do in the private sector. But in the public sector, the issue is going to be you're in for a long haul of potentially large budget reductions. And if you haven't thought about your strategy and what you're going to be doing to support the public and to support your internal partners, it's going to be awfully hard to compete for resources and to be successful. So in the public sector, there's that reason. But in the private sector, someone else is going to be thinking strategically if you're not. And you're going to lose your business to someone who comes out of left field at you. At least it seems like it because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I guess the next question is, with the ever evolving nature of technology, right? What processes do you think that organizations need to follow to continuously modernize technology platforms, right? Because there is also, sometimes legacy kind of builds up, right? So one part is technology platforms constantly evolving, trying to stay up to date. And then the second aspect is also your employee workforce, right? How do you keep them abreast and updated with things as they keep changing?
Yeah, that's really tough. And I think it's really hard in the public sector, but it's hard everywhere. So you've got two problems: the platform and the people, and they go hand in hand. Because you can't update your platforms if you don't have the people with the right skills to keep changing with the platforms. One of the things that I say is that you can train your employees and worry that they're going to leave, or you can not train them and be afraid they're going to stay. So it's really important to continue to teach your employees new skills, and give them those opportunities to grow and learn. It's even more important to teach them the soft skills that allow them to keep learning, to create a learning organization where people will really focus on continuing to grow and evolve their skills. Having that kind of environment where you encourage learning and you encourage growth and you continue to offer training and you continue to create roadmaps for employees to understand where they can go is hugely important, which then enables your ability to update those platforms. And the public sector in particular, public sector in particular has a problem with legacy, right? They tend to build up a lot of legacy. And it's true of lots of large, older companies too. I think a lot of newer companies have figured out how to avoid owning a lot of platforms and a lot of tools, unless it's, of course, their product itself. But it's very, very difficult to get past that legacy. And the public sector has a habit of trying to do big bang replacements. They love to go to the old waterfall process and think that they can figure out 200 or 2,000 requirements for something and then go out to bid and then hire someone to do that. And 3 years later, they're going to get something. And of course, what they get 3 years later is useless. It's not what they needed. The market has changed. It's not going to meet anybody's needs out there. The private sector is a little less likely to do that because there is the profit imperative attached to the work.
Right.
But it's still true that we often tend to be slow at modernizing, and we need to bite off small chunks of the work, right? When you talk about software, the concept of using microservices and APIs and segmenting your solution, often those old legacy systems we're building on weren't designed that way. They're a big pile of spaghetti, right? And you got to be able to take those things apart and modernize them piece by piece and build those services in a way that you don't create the next legacy system, but that you create something that you can very agilely replace piece by piece. Obviously, when you got hardware involved, it gets more complicated. It's hardware you can't take apart piece by piece quite as easily and replace the pieces. But some of the same concepts apply, and certainly the idea of being able to continue to learn and grow and develop the skills and capabilities so that you have the people on board who can replace that platform is absolutely critical.
Sure. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Kind of touching upon something that you were just mentioning, I think it would be very useful for a lot of people in the audience. Technology is evolving at a rapid pace. I mean, much faster today than yesterday, and it's going to be even more faster tomorrow than what it is today. Right? And you touched upon, the public sector having difficulties kind of evolving and moving at that. So would be curious, based on your experiences, both at Santa Clara County and the EPA, how did you go about kind of, trying to bring about that digital transformation in these organizations?
So that's a big question. And if you look at them, the first thing was making sure that you had the right people with the right skills and the right jobs. So in Santa Clara, for example, we really had to go through and look at what the actual job descriptions were that we were offering to hire people against. Many of them were very, very old, and they were not allowing us to hire the right people. So figuring out how to get the right people in there is hugely important. So that has to be done, and that's that. I say that in a couple sentences. But it's a big challenge in the public sector to make that change. Another piece really is ensuring that people have the right training once they're in your organization. They're constantly given opportunities to get new training and to understand, the new technologies that are coming forward and that are available to them. So, from a staff standpoint, it's getting the right people in the right organization with the right training, and then creating that vision of what the organization is and what we're trying to accomplish, and applying those resources to the projects that we want to achieve. So there's the staff piece, and then there is the organizational piece. You've got to be able to design an architecture as an organization, and then you need to create. And part of the reason I say that architecture is so important is because many organizations have 1,000 flowers blooming, 6 different ways to do this, 12 ways to do that. We need to be able to focus in. So having an architecture that focuses us in on certain solutions magnifies our resources available for those solutions. It's important to have a place in the organization to foster innovation. And so creating an innovation lab within your technology organization or some other way to create innovation is important. But what I always likened innovation in my organizations to what we did at HP. So at HP Labs, where they played around with whatever they wanted to play around with, looking for technology for the future. And then you had R&D in the divisions, which developed products for tomorrow or for today. And so they're both innovative. And so I expect innovation to happen across the organization. The lab is the way to figure out sort of what the future might look like for the organization, where the folks in, say, in a healthcare team or in a public safety team are delivering what the organization needs tomorrow. I expect them all to be innovative, and we need to enable that innovation across the board. It just looks a little different in different parts of the organization, but it's important to give people that freedom to be innovative, which means that you need to make sure that they feel safe taking a risk, that you need to put some guardrails around those risks so that they don't make stupid mistakes, right? That they don't take on risks that are so big that they swamp the organization. As an example, I can, if someone tries something that costs $25,000 and it fails, that's fine. We can walk away from that. If we invest in a $20 million project and then 3 years down the road it fails, well, if I was a federal CIO, I might be $20 million might not get me in front of Congress, but it certainly would get some people's attention. I would certainly be having some conversation with the Office of Management and Budget. And so we need to give people the opportunity to try things on a small scale and to fail, and then find ways that succeed so that we don't have big failures coming out in the future. So that's a big part of that innovation, is taking away that risk in the sense of making it small enough that the risk doesn't matter a great deal to the organization, that it can absorb the cost of the risk you take. And insulating the employees so they know that if they take those risks, they're safe. And then that starts creating an environment where people feel like they can take risks, which is really the only way you're going to create innovation and change in an organization, is to make people feel safe enough to take risks.
In terms of, public sector or government organizations' adoption of, both from a process point of view, which is, let's go agile, let's do scrums, and as well as from an architecture point of view, right, which is, let's move towards a microservices architecture or, web services and so on. Are you seeing a lot of that change starting to happen in those organizations as well, or do you still feel that there's like resistance to change? Or
yeah, that's a great question. So I think at the federal level there's a lot of adoption. I think there's still some places where it's not happening at the federal level, but I think that there's sort of a critical mass of interest at the federal level. It hasn't scaled yet. It hasn't had success at scale, but I think there's a critical mass of interest. At the state and local level, I continue to be frustrated by the number of projects that I see going out for RFP that are, I want to hire a systems integrator. And I've got nothing against the integrators, don't get me wrong, but it starts with, I want to hire a system integrator who can do this big project. And here's my 2,000 requirements, and, come back to me in 3 years when it's done. And that would even be okay if they were defining that architecture that way, right? If they were saying, it wouldn't be great because there are a lot of problems with that, but it would be better than just go do it the way it's always been done. And, we struggled when we started doing this in the federal space to really push our vendors to get on board with us. They knew how, I didn't have the ability to do it this way. They knew how to work with the federal government. They wanted to keep working with the federal government the way they knew how to work with the federal government. And, it's very comforting, or maybe comforting is not the right word, but it's very nice when you're a vendor and you get that $7 million or $20 million or $100 million deal under your belt, right? I got that. I want it. I don't have to go compete for 10 sprints or 20 sprints or, whatever that small increment of business that I'm offering to the vendors is. And so there's a lot of incentive on both sides to kind of do things the way that's always been done. And when you contract the way you've always contracted, you tend to build the way you've always built, and you tend to buy the way, you tend to do things exactly the same way. So I would say we are making progress, but we have a long way to go, and that we've certainly made better progress at the federal level. And that's partly as well because the federal procurement organizations are on board. They may not, every buyer may not be on board, every procurement officer, but organizationally, they understand this is the way of the future. That's very much not true in a lot of cases at the state and local level. At the state and local level, in a lot of cases, there are some great procurement folks. I'll shout out to Colorado, where there's some amazing things going on in Colorado Digital Services around procurement in particular. But a lot of state and local procurement officers like the way the world was, and they want to keep it that way. And so they're not very interested in helping deliver innovation. And IT and procurement in the government have to be partnered even more so than you do in the private sector, because procurement can either help you be successful or they can make sure you're not.
As we kind of all adapt to this new way of working from home, and pretty much you see a lot of articles kind of written about digital transformation and a faster pace of change, of figuring out and kind of building tools for better productivity and so on. Would be curious, how would you define, quote unquote, the new normal, let's say a year from now or 2 years from now, based on our experiences? What can hopefully change to make us more productive, and eventually get to a stage where anybody can work from anywhere whenever they want over whichever device?
Yeah. So part of me thinks that a lot of organizations are going to snap back to where they were when they can, which is a shame. And I think the longer this goes on, I don't want this to go on longer. I really want to, think out. I want to go do things. I want to get on an airplane. But the longer we are in this, the less likely organizations are to snap back, because they've had a long time to develop those habits, and people have demonstrated success in those habits. So what I think is going to happen with some organizations is you're going to see them change to a model where maybe people come in 1 or 2 days a week specifically to have meetings. And I can imagine organizations that sort of gut their buildings, take out all the cubes, and just have a bunch of meeting rooms. And obviously that requires us to be back to a place where we can all get together again. And the reason I think that may happen is because there is value to face-to-face interaction, and we do not have the tools yet that really mimic that face-to-face interaction. We don't have a virtual reality or an augmented reality where you can sort of walk into the room and have side conversations with people and really have that full experience that people have when they're at work, and those serendipitous interactions. So I think some organizations may move to that sort of a model. I think others may just have more flexibility with telework, fewer days in the office in general. I think that some of these organizations that are saying you can go work anywhere, right? So, was it LinkedIn that said, don't come back ever and feel free to no, it's Twitter. Anyway, don't come back ever and feel free to work wherever you want to work. And so those, I think they'll realize that there is value to face-to-face interaction as well. And in those cases, I think what you'll see is that they will have, say, once, twice, 4 times a year, everybody has to show up someplace and have that interaction in a face-to-face way. So I think obviously this is involved with the technology we're developing to work better together. And I think the tools are going to have to continue to evolve, because I think now we see I think early on, everyone was all excited to get on conferences and have virtual happy hours. And now you see people are like on meetings and they're not turning on their cameras because they're tired of being on Zoom. They're tired of the interaction. And so, obviously that will get better after a pandemic when people get to go out again. But it's going to be an interesting ride to get from point A to some stability. And I think it's going to be kind of fits and starts, not just because we're going to have ups and downs with health and all that.
If you were to place bets on like 3 industries that you think will see, the biggest transformation by technology or a digital adoption, which 3 would it be?
Well, I think, we are seeing, as a result of this pandemic, I think we're seeing tremendous changes in healthcare, first of all, right? This incredibly sudden adoption of digital medicine and home and online visits and that sort of thing, telehealth. that's one. And I think there's also going to be some interesting, changes in terms of business models around healthcare, driven by this, and some assumptions about what we can do in terms of research. I think government, I've got to give a real shout to government in the term that a lot of government sort of had maintained that, yeah, you come to me, attitude. And, now we're seeing things that we can't make you stand in an hour-long line at the DMV. We got to find a different way to do this, right? And in Utah, it's you sit in your car and they text you exactly when it's your turn and you come inside. And while that may not seem like a wonderful digital innovation, I'd rather sit in my car or sit on a bench outside than stand in line waiting for the DMV to give me my turn. So I think that's another one where government is changing dramatically, and rapidly. There are a lot of people who say we've made 2 or 10 years of progress in government in the course of months. And then another one, obviously, is education. And the question about education is, how much of the change in education is temporary and how much is permanent? Because again, just like working together, I think there's no substitute for in-person education. But I think we will see that some of the hybrid stays, and so you may see that people mix up their education in different ways than they used to, so it'll be interesting to see how things change.
Gotcha. All right, and I guess coming to my final question, what advice would you have for the graduating class? As they come out facing this kind of a situation?
Wow. Take a deep breath. I think now more than ever, resiliency and flexibility is important. I hear about, obviously, lots and lots of graduates who can't find jobs, but I also hear about graduates who found different jobs than they expected, better jobs than they expected. So being flexible and willing to try things that might be different than what they intended, and being just willing to take a chance, right? I think that whenever people ask me for my career advice, it's don't get too comfortable. The worst mistakes I've made in my career have been not taking a chance, where I look back and I go, wow, I stayed there too long, or I didn't take that opportunity when it came to me. It's never been taking the leap that I've regretted. So would really encourage these young graduates to look for the opportunity to take the leap into the unknown, because everything's changing, and that's where the opportunities are going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Anne, for your time. Your insights were extremely valuable. I'm sure our audience is going to love it. It's really an honor and a privilege to have you on the show.
Well, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to hearing the show when it's done.
Absolutely. Will do. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.